All right, welcome in everybody. This is going to be a brief history of Palestine and Israel. So, every day in the news, we've seen images and stories about what's going on right now between Israel, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, all of those areas in the Middle East. So, I'm just going to give you some background, and this isn't by any means a full background of what's going on or what has happened. This is just what I think are some important points to consider when you see what's happening currently over there. So here we go. So let's talk about the Palestinian state. So around 1900, the Palestinian state began to form. It was made up mostly of Arabs, Muslims. After World War I, Europeans take control of Palestine. So Palestine used to be part of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was on the losing side of World War I, and land was confiscated from them, and Europeans ran that part of the world and divided it up into different chunks. So right when Europeans take control of Palestine, conflict arises between Jewish immigrants and Palestinians for control of land in this area. So a lot of the problems that you see today are the result of hostilities that arose over land, particularly land that could be used for farming, land that was valuable, and land that was historically important to different religious groups. Remember that. So, in response to Jewish persecution throughout Europe during the 1930s and the Nazi attempt to exterminate Jewish people through the Holocaust, many Jewish people started to move back to Palestine. So, historically, people that were Jewish were from that part of the world in Palestine. They had left Palestine for a number of different reasons, and they dispersed throughout Europe. And then they're going to return there because they see it as their homeland. So between 1920 and 1939, the Jewish population of Palestine increased by 320,000. So that was a little bit about Palestine. So let's talk about Israel. So Israel wasn't a country until 1947. This is right after World War II. So leading up to World War II, in this area between 1897 and 1947, there's a Zionist movement that begins. So Zionists are a group that claims Jewish people deserve a nation of their own, and they want it to be right here in what is Palestine. So the argument was that Jewish people have been persecuted throughout history by various countries. This is definitely true. One of the most persecuted groups in the history of the world, you could argue. And they are looking for a country to call their own to avoid future violence. So they want to move to this area to avoid being persecuted in different parts of the world. And here's a graph of Jewish immigration to Palestine between 1880 and 1910. You could see it's slowly going up. Okay, so 1947 is the important date. So the UN decides to divide Palestine into two separate states. Palestine, which is going to be the Arab state, and Israel, which is going to be the Jewish state. Israel agrees with this plan, but the Arab Middle Eastern states do not. And one of the reasons is because Israel receives a slightly larger share of the land, just slightly larger. And a lot of this territory down here, important to remember, that is part of the Jewish state, is uninhabitable. That's the desert. So even though Jewish people were given this territory, it's not like a lot of people could live there because it was out in the middle of the desert. And the city of Jerusalem, probably the most important piece of all of this, is put under UN administration. So neither Israel nor Palestine receives the city of Jerusalem. So you can see this is a very strangely drawn map, right? So you have the Jewish state, which is interspersed throughout the Arab state. And it's really, really weird the way that they drew this. And this is going to lead to conflict, you can imagine, because that map is not clean by any means. And it's very hard to divide up that territory amongst people. Here's a zoomed in picture of that map. Okay, so why are they fighting? And again, this is a lot more complicated. I'm just going to give you the basic overview, okay, because we have limited time here. So if you boil it all down, Israelis and Palestinians both claim the same land as their own, either through some sort of religious view, the presence of holy sites, or the historical population of that territory. So they're arguing over land pretty much. Palestinians see the Jewish people as encroaching on their land, and that is rightly theirs. And Israelis think they have a right to the land as well. So it's very hard to rectify these competing viewpoints because both groups think they have the right to be there, and the other group does not. Muslim countries, not just Palestine, surrounding Muslim countries like Iraq, Syria, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, have repeatedly attacked Israel over the decades, and Israel has taken land from Palestinians after these wars. So let's talk about some of these conflicts, because this isn't the first time these people have fought. So Palestine and other Muslim countries immediately declared war on Israel after the formation of Israel. So the first war was the Arab-Israeli War. Israel won this war over a combination of Muslim countries, and then they begin to take more land from the Palestinians because they won the war. Palestinians are expelled from Israel or isolated in the Gaza Strip or the West Bank after this war. And then things are put on hold for about, 18 years until we get to the 6-Day War. Israel again goes to war with several Middle Eastern countries and wins another victory. And they continue to take more land from Palestinians after they win this victory. So this is the state of Israel before the 6-Day War, and then this is the state of Israel after the 6-Day War. So you can see all of this territory that they laid claim to. The Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. All of that belonged to Israel after the 6-Day War. And then in 1978, you get these things called the Camp David Accords. So Israel agrees to return land to Egypt, that big Sinai Peninsula that we looked at before, this big chunk of territory. They give that back to Egypt. That deal is cut by the United States. This is Jimmy Carter. He was president of the United States at the time. Israel was still occupying Gaza and the West Bank, however. Shortly after these accords, Israeli citizens began moving into Palestinian territory, Gaza and the West Bank, and they settle there, so they live there. Now, technically, these settlements are illegal under international law currently, but Jewish people still move into these settlements, and these settlements are still established in Palestinian territory. Here's a graph showing the number of Israeli settlements in places like the West Bank. And then as we approach, as we get closer to modern day, you get this thing called the First Intifada. Palestinians and Israelis come into conflict in occupied territories. You notice a recurring theme here. It's a lot of fighting. This is when Hamas is actually formed in the Gaza Strip, and you've heard this term a lot throughout the news. This is a terrorist organization in the Gaza Strip, but not in the West Bank. Their stated goal is the elimination of Israel. So this is literally in their charter. They're trying to eliminate Israel from the face of the earth. So they're going to go to war with Israel and try and win, take back all that land that they think is theirs. This is part of the reason why they launched these attacks. The Oslo Accords were also signed in 1993, creates the Palestinian Authority and gave Palestinians more freedom to govern themselves. So this was an attempt at peace in 1993. Many of these have been attempted. But the Israeli prime minister that comes to this agreement is actually assassinated by an Israeli citizen. They saw this as treasonous, an Israeli prime minister agreeing to some sort of peace agreement with Palestinians. The second Intifada, this happens 2000, 2005. This is much worse than the first. So this is when you get construction of the walls and checkpoints around Palestinian-held territory in the West Bank and Gaza. And in 2005, Israel actually leaves Gaza, so they no longer occupied, and Hamas gains control of the government there. And the PLO is the government in the West Bank, Palestinian Liberation Authority, or organization, sorry. Palestinian Liberation Organization. This is one of the walls around Gaza. Israel-Palestine conflict deaths. You can see it peaks there in 2002. Okay, and as we get towards the end here, who is Hamas? So this is the group that you hear about all the time, doing awful things during this conflict that just started. And they've been responsible for some atrocities for some time now. Founded in 1987, they control the government in Gaza. It's a terrorist group, considered a terrorist group by most countries in the world. Again, like I said, its number one goal is to destroy the state of Israel. Hamas, before this attack or this offensive into Israel, routinely launched rockets against Israel from within Gaza, mostly at civilian targets. And it's responsible for this offensive, like I said, and the hostage crisis that resulted. I think they still have over 200 hostages that they're holding. Okay, and finally, I want to talk about the holy city of Jerusalem, because this is located in and around all these areas that are in question. So the city of Jerusalem, key city in three major religions: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. They all have reasons to call this city their city or claim it as their own. There are a number of holy sites and buildings within the city. Both Israelis and Palestinians consider Jerusalem their city. So why is it considered important to a lot of these religions? So 2 temples holy to Jewish people once stood in Jerusalem. Muslims believe Jerusalem is where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. The Dome of the Rock, you can see it right here, is a structure important to both Jewish people and Muslims. And the Al-Aqsa Mosque is also in Jerusalem, one of the holiest places on earth for Muslims. So you can see this is very important to both Muslims and Jewish people. And again, I think I showed you some of this in class. This was the state of Palestine, 1947. And then you can see slowly over the years, it is reduced and reduced and reduced, and Israel becomes much bigger. And then the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. There's the Dome of the Rock. And that is going to be the end of our presentation. I've got some videos at the very end if you want to watch and brush up on your history.